With the 20th anniversary of my all-time favorite movie just passing, I want to talk about the movies of 1999 and why I think it's the greatest year in the history of film. 1999 was a very important year in my life. I was 23 years old, I'd been out of school for a few years, and was working a dead-end job without a lot of direction. The one thing that was clear was that I love movies. I went to the theater at least once a week and was constantly renting films. In 1999, it seems like I was blown away at least once a month by a new film. You know that feeling when you walk out of a great film and your mind is reeling from what you just saw? That happened to me more in 1999 than has happened to me in the 20 years since. Now maybe that's just me getting older and more jaded, but I still watch so many of these films and they still bring back those same feelings.
Who the fuck do you think you are, you crazy little shit?
When 1999 began, it was all about Star Wars. George Lucas was bringing back his beloved series after nearly 2 decades, and that teaser trailer had us film geeks frothing at the mouth to see more. It was all anybody could talk about leading into that year, but we had to wait until May to see it.
Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
In the early months of that year, I saw Payback, a brutal but well-made Mel Gibson revenge flick, Jawbreaker, a fun dark teen comedy that's got a strong Heathers vibe, Nicolas Cage's 8mm, Ed TV, a decent Ron Howard comedy that was at the forefront of reality stars, but it's mostly forgettable, Ravenous, a long-forgotten Western horror comedy about cannibals starring Guy Pearce that I thoroughly enjoyed and will still watch from time to time.
Now, one man must choose.
We need ovens.
Between having dinner and being dinner.
Then I saw the first movie to truly hit me that year, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Guy Ritchie's style was a revelation. His mix of fast talking and even faster action entranced me. It introduced us to Jason Statham and kicked off the career of one of our best action directors.
Right, wrap them guns up, count the money, put your seatbelt on.
Even though I saw a ton of films that year, my biggest miss that winter was Office Space, the first film I would consider a classic of 1999. I wasn't alone. Hardly anybody saw it that year. But 20 years later, we all know it, we all love it, we all still meme and quote it.
Yeah. If you could just go ahead and make sure you do that from now on, that would be great.
But come April 2nd, my world was absolutely rocked by The Matrix. I didn't know much about the Wachowskis. I'd seen and enjoyed Bound, but I didn't fall in love with them as filmmakers then. Keanu Reeves didn't do much for me. I was never a big fan of Speed, and I only remembered him as the guy from Bill and Ted's. But the trailers made it look interesting, and I saw any sci-fi or action movie at that time, so of course I was there opening night. I was in it from the opening frame. It opens with Trinity fighting the cops, then escaping the agents in superhero fashion. It got my mind buzzing, and it just kept getting stronger and stronger as the movie went on. When Neo woke up in the pod, covered in goo, I felt much like him, completely confused by what was going on. The movie continued with what can only be described as some of the greatest action scenes in the history of film, along with an expanding universe that tickled my fancies about a dystopian future run by machines. I left the theater like I'd just dropped acid. I'd never seen anything like it before, and I've never gotten that high off a movie since. I immediately went back to see it again and again. It held up to every viewing. Every time I saw it, I discovered something new. To this day, it remains my favorite film of all time. But Star Wars still lay ahead. In the weeks between, I saw Go, written by the great John August, and directed by Doug Liman, who'd made the hugely influential Swingers a few years prior. Every time I see the Columbia logo, I still think of this film. Election came out, a hilarious dark comedy which remains my favorite Alexander Payne film, and my favorite Reese Witherspoon performance. In many years, this might have been one of my favorites, but I don't even think it cracks my top 10 of 1999.
Oh, hi, Tracy.
Who put you up to this?
Existence, a lesser David Cronenberg film, but still Cronenberg through and through. Idle Hands, a highly underrated teen horror comedy that still holds up well to this day. Then there was The Mummy, a thoroughly enjoyable adventure movie that ended up being a big hit that year, but it didn't leave a fully lasting impression on me, but I'm happy to watch it whenever it's on.
We are in serious trouble.
Finally, it was time for Star Wars Episode 1. I had tickets to see it 3 times opening day. First, I saw it early that morning. I think I was just in shock that I was sitting there watching a new Star Wars film. Nothing fully penetrated. The pod race scene was fun, the final lightsaber battle with Darth Maul was cool. The second time around, I was trying to love it, but by the third time, I knew something was wrong. But there's been enough said about that film, and I don't need to say any more.
Fear is the path to the dark side.
So I was a little disappointed coming out of May. The Matrix was still showing, and I probably saw it a few times after Star Wars to wash that bad sci-fi taste out of my mouth. There was Austin Powers 2, which was a huge deal, because while the original had come out 2 years earlier, it didn't catch on until it hit video. And by that point, it was probably the most popular comedy in the world. The Spy Who Shagged Me isn't a classic, but it didn't disappoint and only built on its popularity. I saw Tarzan, one of the last hand-drawn Disney animated features. It's a decent film, and I sure miss that style of filmmaking. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. It was the biggest cult show of the moment, and them getting to make an R-rated movie was a big deal. It definitely has its moments. Wild Wild West. Will Smith was the biggest star in the world at that time, and that was supposed to be his big summer movie, but it was just the biggest disappointment this side of Star Wars. Summer of Sam, one of my top 5 Spike Lee films, but not a classic, but it's well made and entertaining. American Pie was a huge hit. I found it hilarious. I saw it 2 or 3 times in the theaters, and many more times on DVD in the years following, and I still think it holds up pretty well today. Then came the last movie to truly scare me in theaters. At that time, the internet was just beginning, and there were rumors that a film was coming out that featured people dying for real. Yeah, I didn't buy that, but it was a scary thought going in, and how raw the film was, you kinda wanted to believe it. I got to see The Blair Witch Project at a secret screening a few weeks before it came out. I hadn't seen anything like it. I think that your imagination is so much scarier than anything you can show on screen. So that movie worked perfectly for me. You never really see anything. It's all in your head. Every time night came around, the suspense ratcheted up a few notches. That final scene when they run into the house and find Mike standing in the corner filled me with dread, but I loved it. At 23 years old, I lost some sleep the next few nights, and I've never had a horror movie leave an impression on me like that since. After that, we were just a few weeks away from another huge event in my movie dorkdom. It was Stanley Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut. Kubrick had been responsible for quite a few big movie memories at that point in my life, and I couldn't wait to see his final masterpiece. I left underwhelmed, and it's a movie I still haven't fallen in love with, but I've had huge Kubrick fans tell me it's one of his best. It's definitely a film I need to revisit. Lake Placid, The Haunting, Deep Blue Sea, they were all serviceable horror films that I saw that summer, but nothing too memorable. Now we're in August, and I had 2 films blow my mind in completely different ways on the same weekend. The Iron Giant remains my favorite animated film of all time, and the only time I've ever cried from an animated film.
Really?
The film works on every level. It's beautifully animated, Brad Bird's script and direction is near perfect, the score, the voice acting, it's a straight-up masterpiece. I fell in love with Hogarth and the Giant, so by the time he sacrifices himself at the end to save Hogarth and the town, I was bawling. Then there was The Sixth Sense, which blew the world's mind. And mine. I still think it's M. Night's best film.
I see dead people.
Following that, I saw Mystery Men, Bowfinger, and Detroit Rock City, all fun comedies that I'm still happy to watch. We're into September, and the very controversial American Beauty came out. At that time, I absolutely loved the film, and was happy that it won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. I know it doesn't work for some people, and I can understand why, but it's still a film I'm happy to revisit from time to time. Breakfast of Champions is a completely forgotten film, but Alan Rudolph's adaptation of a Kurt Vonnegut novel is quite a trip. Bruce Willis was still willing to act at that point, and I'll often point people in that movie's direction if they want to see something nobody else has.
There've been no more questions.
For the Love of the Game is a very entertaining Kevin Costner baseball flick, directed by one of my personal favorite directors, Sam Raimi. October brought us an early David O. Russell film, Three Kings, another very underrated, mostly forgotten about anti-war action comedy with a great cast. I'd give it a solid B+. Whoa! But then came the fifth or sixth film to absolutely blow my mind that year, Fight Club. David Fincher's direction is perfection. Brad Pitt and Edward Norton are at the height of their powers. It's a script that inspired millions of people to change their worldview, with a final twist that melted minds. I think it's such an influential film that it's gone past its tipping point, so people kind of mock it now. But I think it holds up as another 1999 masterpiece.
Tyler, what the fuck is going on here?
I ask you for one thing. One simple thing.
Why do people think that I'm you?
Then we got a new David Lynch film, The Straight Story. It wasn't the trip that most of us were expecting. It's definitely his most subdued film, but it's a very well-crafted, entertaining drama. Then there was a new Scorsese film, starring at the time the very hot Nicolas Cage. It didn't hit the way it should have, and I can't remember if I've seen it since, but it's a Scorsese film to be sure. The Insider isn't a personal favorite, but it's a highly regarded Michael Mann film. Then came Dogma. I was a huge Kevin Smith fan at that time. This new take on his View Askew-averse was a big departure from Jay and Silent Bob just hanging around the convenience store. This comedy explores heaven, hell, God, and the universe in only a way that Kevin Smith could. I personally think it's his best film.
You gotta be kidding me.
That same weekend, there was a new Luc Besson film. In the few years before that, he'd blown my mind with The Professional and The Fifth Element, so I couldn't wait to see his latest, The Messenger, the story of Joan of Arc. It's not well remembered by most, but it works for me. It's got some great action scenes, and I think it's Mila Jovovich's best performance. Now we're heading into the holidays, and there's still quite a few great films yet to come. There's a new Tim Burton film, Sleepy Hollow, which, while not great, is very fun and has all those great Burton visuals we enjoy. End of Days. I was and still am a huge Arnold fan. This wasn't one of his best, but it's not one of his worst either. Toy Story 2, a very worthy sequel to the original. The Cider House Rules was a well-done drama film.
Good night, you princes of Maine.
Being John Malkovich came out of the blue and warped my mind yet one more time. It was Spike Jonze's first feature film. It was extremely weird and hilarious, and it just took me to places I didn't know a film could go. In many years, this probably would be my favorite film of the year. But there it is, just another great film from 1999.
Malkovich!
The Green Mile was exciting as Frank Darabont's follow-up to his last Stephen King adaptation of The Shawshank Redemption. And although it's not nearly the film that one is, it's well crafted and has a few memorable scenes. Oliver Stone's Any Given Sunday may be the best representation of NFL football yet captured on film. Man on the Moon was a great dramedy with a fantastic lead performance that broke Jim Carrey. It's a film that deserves to be remembered.
Here I come to save the day.
Then I was dying to see the new Paul Thomas Anderson film, who I'd fallen in love with thanks to Boogie Nights. This film is a bit too rambling, but it has some great scenes and performances. The Talented Mr. Ripley is a fantastic thriller with a top-notch cast, including Matt Damon, Gwyneth Paltrow, Cate Blanchett, Jude Law, and Philip Seymour Hoffman. I'd consider it another near masterpiece. It's a film that deserves to be remembered. It's a great shame that we lost writer-director Anthony Minghella not too long after, and we didn't get to see where his career would take him.
Tommy? That's a peeping.
And finally, I submit the last film of 1999 that left me with a long-lasting impression. A film that is more well-regarded today than it was then, Galaxy Quest. I think it was a bit too meta for 1999. It took a few years for people to catch on to the brilliance of this sci-fi comedy. It's got a fantastic cast and an even better screenplay. It's a film that I can watch over and over and laugh at new jokes every time out.
Guy, you have a last name.
Do I? For all you know, I just come in number 6.
So there it is, 1999, how I lived it as a moviegoer. We got new films from so many master directors, including Mike Judge, Harold Ramis, Guy Ritchie, Clint Eastwood, the Wachowskis, Robert Altman, Doug Liman, Alexander Payne, David Cronenberg, Sam Raimi, Jim Jarmusch, Spike Jonze, Spike Lee, Stanley Kubrick, Brad Bird, M. Night Shyamalan, Albert Brooks, Roman Polanski, Sam Mendes, David O. Russell, David Fincher, David Lynch, Martin Scorsese, Michael Mann, Kevin Smith, Luc Besson, Tim Burton, Sofia Coppola, Ang Lee, Oliver Stone, Milos Forman, Steven Soderbergh, and Paul Thomas Anderson. This group of directors is responsible for some of the greatest films of all time. I don't believe we've had a year since that could match that powerhouse of a lineup. I think we got 7 true masterpieces in their respective genres. Office Space, The Matrix, The Blair Witch Project, The Iron Giant, The Sixth Sense, Fight Club, and Galaxy Quest. 7 films that changed cinema and will be remembered as long as we're watching films. And 30 to 40 other wonderful films that still hold up 20 years later. I believe there is no other year that comes close to putting up these numbers. It was a great year for comedies, dark comedies, and teen comedies in particular.
It's not what it looks like.
Anytime I'm going to re-watch something or see something for the first time, I'm so excited to see it come up as released in 1999. I can almost guarantee I'm going to have a good time with it. This is a quick list of films I didn't see in theaters that year, that I've enjoyed or flat out loved since then. 10 Things I Hate About You, 69, All About My Mother, Analyze This, Angela's Ashes, The Boondock Saints, Boys Don't Cry, But I'm a Cheerleader, Cruel Intentions, Dick, Drop Dead Gorgeous, Ghost Dog, Girl Interrupted, The Hurricane, Jesus' Son, The Limey, The Muse, Mystery Alaska, Notting Hill, October Sky, Titus, Twin Falls, Idaho, Varsity Blues, and The Virgin Suicides. That in itself is a hell of a lineup.
Think you can handle a station wagon?
Sure. It's not a stick, is it?
There was definitely something special in the filmmaking era that year. Do you agree, or what would you submit as your favorite year? 1984 and 1994 are also strong contenders, but those are videos for another day.
This is a tasty burger.
Thanks for watching. I plan to make more of these movie essays. Please subscribe if you enjoyed.